You know, a good reminder from Genesis chapter 1, verse 3 is God always pierces the darkness, always. And the darkness doesn't last.
And the high priest, the great high priest who is Jesus Christ, he puts his hands on your life and you take your hands off and you say, my life is surrendered for your purposes.
I want to welcome everybody back to another episode of the Downline podcast. My name's Jamie Trussell, and it is my privilege to host this for Downline and to serve as the lead pastor of Redeemer Dripping Springs. We hope this podcast helps you faithfully walk with Jesus while pouring your life into others. And today we are joined by Dr. Iain Provan, and I am thrilled. I kind of told you a little bit before we started recording how I came across your work, but thanks so much for joining us.
Great pleasure to be here today, Jamie.
For those that may not be familiar with you and kind of your career in teaching at Regents and kind of what you're up to now, can you just take a few minutes, tell us about you, your family, and your career in ministry and teaching?
Sure. I grew up in the UK, in Scotland initially. That's where I was educated first, and eventually I followed an academic track. So I taught in universities in Britain. In 1997, we came to Canada to take up a position at Regent College in Vancouver. I'm married to Lynette. We have 4 children and currently 4 grandchildren.
Oh, wow. Congrats.
And we're well rooted here. And I taught at Regent till the end of 2022, and then I retired. And since that time, I've been running my own little theological consultancy called the Cuckoo's Consultancy, which is designed to help churches and Christian organizations wrestle with identity issues, some of the big issues of our time.
Well, I mean, you've written proficiently. I mean, so many works, especially in the Old Testament. I've been really blessed by it. Before we get to Ecclesiastes, I did see you have a book about that, the cuckoo and the lies. Give us a quick flyover of that, because that one seemed pretty interesting to me. I haven't read it yet.
Sure. So the title of that book is Cuckoos in Our Nest, Truth and Lies About Being Human. And it's really designed for as wide an audience as I could possibly get. So the chapters are very short. They're just 4 pages long. Each one of them takes some aspect of the Christian idea of being human and discusses it. And I also spend a lot of time discussing other ideas that are very popular in the culture, where they come from, why we shouldn't buy into them. And the cuckoo's image is really the image of smuggling ideas into a nest where they don't belong. So readers who read the book will get a fuller account of the European cuckoo, but we don't need to dwell on that just now.
Okay, so you've written tons for commentaries, made lots of theological contributions. I want to talk specifically Ecclesiastes. I have, in maybe some unexpected ways, fallen in love with continually studying that book. We've done it in our men's group out here in our church plant at Redeemer, but I'll say I kind of read it one way for a long time. And then through Dr. David Gibson and his book, Living Life Backward, and then him quoting you so much coming into your work and your commentary on Ecclesiastes, I think maybe the main thing that threw me off was a misunderstanding of the idea of vanity from the very beginning. So if we could start there and give us a helpful understanding of, is vanity just this like, oh, it's all meaningless and worthless? Because I think you and some others make a really good argument otherwise.
Yeah, of course, all our Bible translations are translations, and they're all very useful, but decisions are made by translators about how to translate words, and words take on meaning and change meaning over time. So vanity is the old King James word, but the word vanity now means something very different than it did back when the people were translating the King James Version. And so that's not a good translation. And then the NIV, which is a very well-used Bible translation in North America, chooses meaningless. And I think that's also quite unhelpful. The Hebrew word is hevel, And if you do a little word study of Hevel through the Bible, you'll discover that actually it refers more to what is fleeting or passing, what is ephemeral, things that lack substance, so on and so forth. So I think we should really translate that important line in Ecclesiastes, something like this: everything is fleeting, everything is passing away. It's not that it's meaningless, it's just that you can't hold on to it, it escapes your grasp, and so on.
So if you were to lay down, somebody's opening up Ecclesiastes, maybe they don't have a good background in it. They know it's important because it's in God's word, and they're reading it, and they're over and over again, they're kind of going, man, either I'm confused or this makes it sound like stuff's pointless in life, or it makes it, what are some good, maybe bumpers or guardrails that you can give people to say, hey, here's some big themes, have this in the back of your mind when you're reading the book to kind of stay generally on track?
Yeah, so I mean, if you can get over that meaningless word first of all and get that out of the way, that's going to help.
Yeah, true.
Because one of the things about the word meaningless is, as you read the book, you come across passages where the author clearly does not believe that life
That's
is
right.
meaningless.
That's right.
In fact, there are many exhortations to joyfulness and enjoying life, the life that God has given us. So that just confuses people right up front. And the second thing that I think is confusing initially is that people don't realize that quite often the author is quoting Proverbs and then reflecting on the quote. And so if you don't get a hold of that, it can look as if he's contradicting himself as he goes along. But actually, this is a deliberate part of his strategy, is to quote a well-known proverb and then to discuss it and to ask questions about how far is this true? What are the limitations of the wisdom here? So probably those are the first two things I would say to reduce the confusion level. Understand the kind of book it is, really, I suppose.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Uh, what about the theme of death? And obviously, we know, generally speaking, theologically, death is an enemy. It's a result of Genesis chapter 3. It's never called good. We know that Jesus has conquered it. And yet, the author of Ecclesiastes puts our mortality into operation in ways that's kind of meant to set us free, to enjoy life, to understand its limits, its bounds. Talk to us a little bit about how the author uses death, not as a positive thing, but as he says, better to go to a house of mourning than right to a party. So what's going on there?
Well, I mean, that's particularly important in a culture that's obsessed with partying, right? Like our contemporary culture often is. I mean, this is just about being realistic. So if you simply think about life within the frame of reference as we experience it, so set aside for the moment what we know about resurrection and so on,
Okay.
which is not part of our current experience. Our experience is that death is a reality for all creatures. And Kohelet, the author, or the speaker, I should just clarify that the author is telling us about the words of Kohelet. So Kohelet is strictly speaking the speaker and not the author, as it were.
Okay.
In the same way that Mark's gospel is written by Mark, but Jesus is the main speaker. You know,
Sure.
that's kind of idea. So what he's really wanting to say to us there is that death is the ultimate evidence that we cannot control existence, right? That existence is beyond our control, and that attempts to control it are going to lead to unhappiness and various kinds of dysfunction. So death is one of the great signs that we are creatures and not gods, and that all attempts to be gods, to try somehow to control our existence, ultimately are doomed to failure. And that really, if we recognize the limitations set around our creatureliness, then we'll be in a position actually to appreciate what's good about our limited existence. Now, the Bible as a whole then goes on, amazingly, to tell us that actually there's a whole other phase of existence beyond the limits of this existence. But Kohelet is not talking about that reality. He's just saying, look at the world as you find it and recognize that you're a creature of God who ought to obey God. And if you accept that truth, you can live a life that is fulfilling.
Yeah. And so when you say that word fulfilling, a life that is enjoyed, which he tells us to do, and even in other places, Deuteronomy, we're commanded to enjoy the Lord and the things that he's given us. In what way? Well, let me press pause there. Why is that such a struggle? Because I do feel like I'm even true of this to me a lot of times. We miss the gift. Hey, I'll use your phrase, gift not gain. We miss the gift because we're trying to gain things.
Yeah.
Why is that so hard for us?
Well, I mean, the biblical answer to that is that we're fallen human beings, of course.
Sure.
I mean, the reality we're now describing is a fallen reality. And the Apostle Paul tells us that one of the first things that goes wrong in our fallenness is our minds. Futility of thinking is one of the first consequences of fallenness. So if you go back to Genesis 3, what is it that human beings want that they don't have yet, that the good God hasn't given them? What they want is to be gods by themselves. Right. They want divinity. And so this striving for godlike control is kind of built into us, it's wired into us now in the fallen state of the world. And it is insane, it is mad, it is evidently bound to fail, and yet there is this deep drive within us constantly to try to get beyond our limitations, not to accept our limitations. I don't think we can, strictly speaking, understand it. It's just like an illness. It's a form of madness, really, but it drives us individually, and it drives contemporary culture specifically, because we've never lived in a world that was so open to control and manipulation by technology and so on.
That's right. Yeah.
And so we can perpetuate this madness way more readily than people who have lived before us. We have the capacity to maintain the illusion of control for longer, and the culture screams at us that is what we should be doing.
That's right.
Every politician, every advertiser, every influencer, what are they all telling us? Take more control. Take more control of your lives. Yeah.
Do you also think, because that's certainly a message, it seems like, too, a message from our culture is almost either like, let's play pretend that we're not going to die, or through technology, we may actually be able to live forever. So let's not talk about death at all, which kind of makes this book pretty shocking, right?
It's a very shocking book, and it's a very contemporary book for that reason. Exactly so. It's not just general attempts at control that we're now into. It is eternal life, I suppose, in some way. I mean, disembodied, of course, but the whole artificial intelligence movement is really, at its core, committed to overcoming our creaturely limitations.
That's right. That's right.
So it's the pursuit of godlikeness, or well, the pursuit of being gods, really. And of course, it is in its own way doomed to failure. It is in its own way a form of madness. But I mean, that's the fallen world for you. You know, we don't even think straight about what's good for us.
Well, one thing that Ecclesiastes, now don't live this out perfectly, or I've got 4 young kids, I've got a wonderful wife, but I'm tested on this, is Ecclesiastes makes it pretty clear. There are better and worse ways to live underneath God, right? Obedience is better than disobedience, and wisdom's better than folly, generally speaking. But there are no predictable outcomes. We could do everything one way and it go terribly, and a fool could miss every step and end up with a great result. And I think part of navigating this life that the book pushes us towards is kind of accepting that and being able to not have that completely wreck us as we're
Yeah.
navigating life. Would you affirm that, or how would you say we process that idea of Ecclesiastes and outcomes, and that nothing's guaranteed?
Well, I mean, wisdom is better than folly, but that is in many ways a faith statement. It's not necessarily a statement you can map onto the world. And Kohelet goes out of his way to show you all the ways in which it doesn't appear to be true, actually, within the frame of reference of our experience. The book of Job spends the entire book
Yeah.
pursuing the same question. So this illustrates a particular problem with the church, that we have our own version of this quest for control. And so you think of the way in which wisdom books like Proverbs become almost in the church like self-help manuals. If you keep this wisdom, you will always be happy,
That's right.
wealthy, and all the rest of that, which simply is not true. It's not biblically true, and it's not experientially true either. And so we're not given wisdom so that we can sort of proceed with our own project of control. Wisdom is better than folly, but we live our lives under God who gives us wisdom. And that involves walking through the valley of the shadow of death, and it involves suffering and all the rest of that. In the end, of course, things will work out just fine. We have a story with a happy ending, of course. But it's important to read all of Scripture, not just the bits that we prefer. So,
So if somebody say they work through your commentary on, which by the way, for those on video, here it is. Highly recommend it. For those that read through that and they come across this concept that, and this is my wording, so if you want to change it, say I never said that and correct me. But in my wording of saying, when we can embrace our limits as creatures under God, we can enjoy life as a gift instead of trying to gain things from it. And what I tag on is, it seems like every time we try to gain something, we wind up ruining it, whatever that thing is. So if I, instead of enjoying time with my kid, if I need that time to somehow provide a deep identity stroke for me or a performance stroke for me, I wind up ruining the very time we could have enjoyed, that sort of thing. Can you unpack that idea of enjoying life under God without ultimately having to produce and to gain something
yeah.
all the time?
Well, I think the key word here is probably grasping. It's when we grasp after things and try and hold on to things which are always escaping our grasp. Kohelet,
That's what he means by chasing the wind.
I was
That
just
idea of
going to,
grasping.
yeah, that was exactly what I was just going to come on to. This is his favorite way of referring to that, is chasing after the wind. You cannot, you can't catch it. You can't contain it. It blows where it wills, as it were. And so it's a very wonderful thing. If you're sailing, you quite like to see it in your sails, and it powers windmills and it does all sorts of good things, but it does so in a way that just makes it impossible for us to somehow control it. And this is the problem that Kohelet is really after here. One of his big themes is a theme that the Bible itself talks elsewhere about a lot, and Jesus talked a lot about, which is acquisition of material possessions as one of our great means of control. And again, open-handedness is what's commended there. You receive it as a gift and you give it away as a gift. You don't try to hold on to it, because that is in the end futile. Ultimately you die anyway, Kohelet would say. So what is it you are seeking to gain here? So it is really much, I think, very much about receiving things as a gift, but not trying to hold on to them. And it is a human tendency, isn't it? I mean, even I have a philosophy: never go back to a place that you really enjoyed visiting the first time, because you will always be disappointed. It's a form of trying to hold on to something that's actually gone already. So.
So when we talk about grasping, you mentioned material possessions for sure. Receive it open-handed, give it away open-handed. How do you counsel people of this idea of maybe God has blessed them materially and they're very affluent, very wealthy. Uh, they want to enjoy what God's given them without guilt, but they also want to give it away generously without throwing themselves into self-driven poverty. And
Yes.
so, how do you just, pastorally, theologically speak into the fact that, if God's blessed you, you shouldn't feel guilty enjoying it, but at the same time, uh, be generous with it without jeopardizing your family's well-being, right? There's all these seemingly competing things going on in people out there.
It's true, but I would say just as you have said it. I think that's exactly right. I think it's perfectly good to enjoy what God has given you, but it's also very wise and good to make sure that you give generously to other people. And both of those things are true. And the reason that Ecclesiastes is a challenging book to read is because it's dealing with complicated reality and it's wanting to say more than one thing at the same time.
Okay.
As a culture, we're very impatient with that now. Anything that can't be tweeted in a small number of characters, anything that can't be said in a few seconds is just way too onerous for us, And yet wisdom requires a lot more of us than that. And it does typically require us to say more than one thing at the same time. So my favorite example is from the book of Proverbs, where we are told in consecutive verses both to answer a fool and not to answer a fool.
That's right.
And some people may say, well, that's contradictory. And to which I respond, no, it's not contradictory. It's just that sometimes it's wise to answer a fool and sometimes it's not. And you have to think about that. Wisdom literature is not given to us, so we have a kind of bunch of
If wisdom
yeah,
literature is
rules.
formulaic, it's almost not operating correctly in our life. Is that fair?
Absolutely. That's exactly what's wrong with treating Proverbs like a self-help book
Yeah.
or whatever, right?
Yeah.
It's not designed to do that. Wisdom requires a lot more of us than that.
Okay, I'm going to read you. I underlined this in your introduction because I really loved it. All right. I want to read it and interact. Talking about Ecclesiastes, everything is a breath. You say, as a whole, the book reveals the emphasis lies on the passing nature of existence. And I love this word. You come back to this a lot. And its elusiveness and resistance to intellectual and physical human control. We mentioned material possessions, but intellectually, how do we know we're even grasping intellectually at trying to control this elusive nature of life?
Well, I mean, how do we know is an interesting question because we're capable, obviously, of tremendous self-deception. I mean, one of the ways we know is being part of the church, where other good people ought to tell us when we're making mistakes. So we're not meant to be behaving entirely individualistically in the first place. And of course, again, here we must be very careful. The Bible's not against intelligence or thinking or rationality or a certain degree of control, if we mean by that organizing our thoughts so we have everything in the right order. In fact, that's really what the end of the book of Ecclesiastes tells us that Kohelet was doing. He was putting everything in right order so that you could understand things properly. So all of that's really good. But in our fallenness, we are capable of taking anything that's good and using it unwisely for bad ends.
Okay.
And so it's like wealth, really. If we use our intelligence for ends that are not God glorifying, but have a lot more to do with our own control of other people, for example, or any version of that self-absorbed kind of use of the intellect. And of course that is as visible in the world as misuse of wealth and anything else, right? There are various ways that people try to become gods, and one of those ways is the intellectual path.
That's right.
It's not that there's anything wrong with the intellect. The intellect is no more fallen than any other part of us. But of course, the question of how you wisely use your mind is a big biblical question.
Well, and with the elusiveness piece, is it fair to say that if we buy into the lie, maybe this is one of the things that came in the cuckoo nest. If we buy into the lie that the more I know, the more I understand, and then the more I can either manipulate outcomes or prevent pain or whatever it is, I just need to know more. And Ecclesiastes says, well, actually, with increased knowledge comes increased pain. Is that his way of combating this particular elusiveness, or is that a different argument altogether?
No, that's definitely part of it. I mean, I used to have this conversation with students of mine as they were coming towards the end of their studies, because they would ask me, well, how will I, now that I've had this education, how will I fit back into my church when I go back home? And I said, well, here's the unfortunate truth, you won't. Because you now, by virtue of knowing more, you also know a lot more than people necessarily want you to tell them. And and because we all like comfort, right? We don't particularly like being challenged by truth if we're truthful. And so by virtue of becoming more knowledgeable, you become inevitably a kind of prophetic figure with one foot inside the comfort zone and one foot outside, as indeed pastors know very, very well, that it's can be a rather lonely existence.
Yeah.
Because you're constantly urging people onwards on a path that instinctively they may not actually want to walk on, truth be told.
Yeah.
So yes, with increased knowledge comes all sorts of challenges. It's not just a good thing, it's a very good thing, I think, to be more deeply educated in our faith. Everyone should strive for it. But if we think it's a recipe just for happiness, Cahalat would say, we want to pause for a thought here. There's a downside as well.
Okay, we've got probably 3-4 minutes left. Is there a particular part of the book that you find the most challenging to understand, that maybe if our casual Bible reader opens it up, that really without a good guide, maybe this section or this chapter is going to be very difficult?
People often ask me that kind of question generally. And so we're talking about the upside of becoming more deeply educated. At this point, no, there's no bit of Ecclesiastes that's more complicated than any other, but that's because I spent a long time with the book, right? I mean, I think I understand the book quite well. Now, whether I am any better than anyone else at living it out, that's a whole other question. Sure. That's the challenge, right? To accept limitations is not in our fallen state what we're wired to do, right? And you see this, of course, in the culture at the moment, this whole idea that our bodies, we don't have to accept our bodily limitations in all kinds of ways, including sexually, is now one of the big themes of our culture. And of course, it leads on a path that's destructive and futile and all the rest of that. But people are very enthusiastic about this idea that follow your dream. We just saw one of your American skiers, deny her bodily limitations and try to go back to very, very fast skiing down a ski slope, even though she had virtually no ACL. And, and you think, really, is that a wise thing to do? I don't believe that was particularly wise. Probably make myself very unpopular with some of your listeners in saying that, but it's a good example of the way in which we are. This idea of the heroic, get beyond the limitations of your life heroically, and this is a great thing to do. Well, Kohelet would say, actually, it's not a great thing to do.
No, that makes sense. No, that makes total sense. Okay. In the minute we got left, I just want to say NIV application commentary, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Songs. We didn't even get to that one, so we'll save the hills of Bether and all that for another time together. But what if we got 60 seconds? What would you give as maybe a final exhortation, as something to hold on to while somebody's wanting to dive into Ecclesiastes, or maybe even where you'd say, here's a good starting point if you want to grow in your knowledge of this particular book?
I think Ecclesiastes, more than some biblical books, does require a good commentary or guide to go along with it, and it's to do with the nature of it. Biblical books don't have, paragraph headings and lots of notes written into them. I know people's Bibles very often do have paragraph headings and notes, but the books themselves don't. And so, for example, the idea I said earlier on that he's often quoting a proverb and then going on to discuss it, you wouldn't necessarily notice that first time around, and you wouldn't necessarily know to question the translation meaningless. So whereas you can pick up the Gospel of Mark and start reading pretty well without a lot of help, there are biblical books where that's not true, and I would say Ecclesiastes is one of those. Song of Songs certainly is.
Certainly.
And I think that these are places where people would be well advised to join a study group or to buy a commentary that they can use that really helps them to make good progress.
Well, you didn't say this, but I'll certainly recommend yours. It's been a good guide for me, and this conversation has been really enjoyable. So thank you for your work on Ecclesiastes, and thanks for joining us.
Great pleasure. Good to be with you all.
We thank you for listening to this episode of the Downline Podcast. Please subscribe, give us 5 stars, help us to get this content out to as many people as possible as we continue to partner with men and women in the Great Commission as we seek to make disciples as a lifestyle for a lifetime.